Good morning. We'll wait a couple more seconds, let people get settled. My name is John Hayek. I'm the Senior Vice President for Budget Policy and Planning with the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. I want to say to everyone this morning, congratulations. You made it. A day and a half of intensive information being thrown at you. I'd like to see a show of hands whose brain is ready to explode this morning. Yeah. That means it was a very successful conference. So this is the last session of the summit. And speaking of summits, anybody out there do any mountain climbing by chance? No? Maybe a little bit. The Mount Everest, anybody know how tall Mount Everest is? 28,000 feet about. That's about 5 miles. All right. Does anybody have an idea of how high you have to go to just get to base camp? About 17,000 feet. About 3 miles, more than 3 miles. That's just to get to base camp. So, and this takes weeks. And so, I guess, my parallel here is that having a lot of good information on best practices is kind of like, to me, it's kind of like getting to base camp. You have a lot of good information, a lot of new ideas, but without an effective implementation strategy to take that program or new initiative to scale, to know that you have the data and information, to really effectively implement that program or initiative or strategy, it's kind of like you're getting to base camp, but not reaching the summit. And moving past base camp is good, but getting to the summit in terms of student success is really our ultimate goal. So we have a few people this morning with us that are going to talk a little bit about effective implementation. We have Rebecca Martin, who's on my direct right here, who's the Deputy Director for Higher Education for the U.S. Delivery Institute. We have E.J. Keeley, who is the Executive Director for Institutional Effectiveness and Research at Eastern Kentucky University. And we also have Carla Hughes, who's the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at Eastern Kentucky University. Morehead State University. I'm sorry. Sorry about that, Carla. Who are going to share some of their experiences in terms of effective implementation with us this morning. Really quickly before we get going, one of my hats that I wear, in addition to strategic planning, is budget and policy. I don't know if any of you have been keeping track of the state budget situation over the last couple months. Anybody reading any articles in the paper or any communications on campus? Well, we have some good news and bad news with the budget. Who wants the good news or the bad news first? Bad news. The bad news first is that higher education is going to lose another $63 million in state support. So that is certainly bad news. It's about a 6.4% budget cut, on top of about $105 million that we've already lost since 2007-08. If you look at that in terms of the operating budgets of the respective campuses, it's 3, 4, 5% loss in operating funds. We have been able to make up some of that operating support in terms of increases in tuition, but as Joe was talking about earlier, it certainly will have an impact on our persistence and student success moving forward. The good news is that the state of Kentucky still provides about over $1 billion in state support for higher education, so that is very good. Since 2007-08, we've been able to retain almost entirely in whole our state financial aid program, which we're very fortunate. Many states have had significant cuts in that area. And as a state, whether you can believe it or not, Kentucky on a per student basis actually is very well funded, both from a state support perspective and also from tuition revenue perspective at this point in time. And so, but nevertheless, as a whole, the budget situation makes our job even more difficult moving forward. I thought I'd start with a little story that will connect us this morning in terms of our speakers. And this is a story going back to my undergraduate days. I did my undergraduate work at University of Chicago. Anybody been on that campus by chance? It's a beautiful campus, very Gothic architecture. But during our student orientation, our freshman orientation there's a student volunteer that takes all the new first-year students around campus, shows them where everything is. And during this orientation, this tour, we go into the student union. And as we enter the student union, there's a very large gold medallion on the floor. And the student volunteer stops there, and she says, "Whatever you do over the next 4 years, never, ever step on that medallion." And so obviously all the students were like, "Well, what's going on here? That sounds a little weird." And she goes on to say, "Well, if you step on that medallion, you will not graduate in 4 years." All right, so every single day I went through those doors of the student union, which I did every day, either directly or subconsciously, what was going through my mind? It was kind of like, don't step on the medallion, graduate in 4 years. Don't step on the medallion, graduate in 4 years, right? And so this, looking back, this was a very effective persistence tool, And I often wonder, do all of our campuses have the gold medallions? What's your gold medallion on campus? It could be a structure, it could be a program, it could be a series of programs. But unless that student volunteer went through the process of describing the meaning, and really it was kind of effective implementation of this persistence strategy, it was just going to be a gold medallion on the floor. And so I think this is what it's like to have a program or a service or a new initiative that's launched on campus or launched at the institution or across the system, and it's just kind of sitting there with a lot of potential without an effective implementation strategy. So again, this is what we're talking about this morning in terms of trying to think about new tools that we can add to our toolbox to help us increase the effectiveness of our implementation. Several years ago, as Kentucky was launching to revise its statewide strategic agenda, it became aware of the U.S. Education Delivery Institute's work in delivery. And we were looking for new tools to help us do a better job of effectively implementing our new strategic agenda. And we were looking for a way to really organize our plan around a more effective delivery framework. We have very aggressive goals that have been put on the table, both for 2015 and ultimately for 2020. And we wanted to create our new plan and create strategies and create new routines and create metrics that were aligned with our ultimate goal for student success. And so we got hooked up with the U.S. Delivery Institute, and Rebecca's going to talk a little bit more about that. But because we wanted to share these tools also with more of our campuses, some of the stuff that the folks at the council were learning, we also formed this past year our own Kentucky Delivery Network. And this is a voluntary network of institutions that are learning about some of these effective implementation strategies. And we have a couple of those institutions who are participating in our network today to talk to you a little bit about what they've learned and some of the things that they're doing. So with that introduction, I'd like to turn it over to Rebecca Martin.
Thank you, John. And let me say thank you for this kind invitation. It's great to be here in Kentucky, the land of the winners. We knew one of our Kentucky campuses was going to make it all the way to win the Final Four, and condolences to those of you from Louisville, but we're really glad to see success in that regard as well. I know that you've had a really packed 2 days. You've heard from the real gurus in student success, Larry Abele, George Koo, and Joe Cusio. And I know that if you are like I was when I was a provost on a campus, your mind right now is just filled with great ideas and things that you're eager to get home and think about how to try for your campus, and most important, how to make them work for your students. But too often, when we come to a conference and hear about something, or we go to a campus and see something in action, and come home and try to make it work on our own home ground, we may be successful in standing it up and launching it and having it working. But at the end of the day, when we look at the retention numbers, when we look at our graduation rates, the impact is just not there. It's not what we hoped it would be. One of the things that we say at EDI, the Education Delivery Institute, is that very oftentimes these programs become random acts of educational improvement. They really aren't tied together. They're not part of a bigger strategy. They're not part of what an institution sees as moving the agenda forward. And we believe that you really need a focused, intentional approach to make that happen. John didn't tell you about my background. I was the provost at the University of Wisconsin Parkside, which is a small, comprehensive campus just south of Milwaukee, the most diverse campus in Wisconsin. And then following that, I was the Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Wisconsin System. And when I was in Wisconsin, we learned about delivery a little ahead of John and Aaron, and started working with Michael Barber, and really could see the results of these tools in action. So I'm standing here before you today as someone who's lived delivery at the ground level and really seen it work in moving the agenda forward. And so what I'd like to do now is to tell you more about this approach, which we really see as a rigorous implementation strategy that will really assure your likelihood of success, really help you deliver on the goals. Delivery is a proven approach. It's something that's been around for about 10 years. It was started in Great Britain by Sir Michael Barber, who was charged by Tony Blair with the goal of delivering on Blair's policy goals for the British citizens. So the things that Blair promised in his second election, he wanted to be sure that they actually would be felt by the citizens of Great Britain. And they were everything from the literacy rate, improving the literacy rate, to shortening waiting times in emergency rooms, to making the trains run on time. His goal was to try to put a process in place that would move the British bureaucracy to deliver on its goals. And he was quite successful in doing that. And following that experience, really saw a need through a number of his connections here in the United States to put these strategies, this approach to work in support of improving U.S. education. So EDI was created to partner with K-12 and higher education systems around the country on ambitious reform agendas to really help deliver on those goals. And you see here some of the states that we are working in. We work both with public higher education systems and state departments of education. In Kentucky, we are working with the Kentucky Department of Education, as well as with the council and the council's Kentucky Delivery Network. We're in 16 states, and we are continuing to grow. And so our theory of action has to do with implementation. And this is what the framework looks like. And I don't expect you to read all those, but if you glance through this list, likely you'll see some things that you recognize. Any of you that have done strategic planning, whether at the institutional level or in your own area, have probably done some of these things. Most of them are just common sense. They're just good planning. But few of us really have sustained these practices in an intentional way over time and used them to move an institution as a whole to deliver on major policy goals. So at the core, what we say is our approach is really about 4 questions. What are you trying to do? How are you planning to do it? At any given moment, how will you know whether or not you're on track? And if not, what are you going to do about it? And being clear and intentional about how you answer these questions, we believe, can really help put you on the track to seeing your student success goals realized. So we think that there are really 3 important parts to this process. The first one is strong aspirations and very strong commitment from top leadership. And you certainly have that in Bob King at the system level. I know you also have it at your campus level from your presidents. the commitment that's really exemplified in your plan, Stronger by Degrees, and in your campus plans to really move the needle on those retention and graduation rates, to close equity gaps, and do a better job in terms of raising the educational attainment level for the state of Kentucky. Then it's linked to action, and really putting together a team that will be responsible for lying awake at night worrying about whether or not you're going to hit those goals, and thinking about how to move the institution, how to support the people at the institution who are responsible for the various areas that go together to make student success a reality, and put delivery tools then in place to support that work. So in higher education, we focus on implementing efforts in our states to achieve college and career readiness for all students, to increase access and post-secondary degree completion, and to close equity gaps. And here's a list of our current partnerships at the system level, and we're in the process of talking to 2 or 3 more systems right now about joining the network. This EDI work grew out of the Access to Success initiative, which Kentucky also joined back 4 years ago when it was formed by the National Association of System Heads and the Education Trust. And this is an initiative where 20 systems across the country came together and made the commitment that by 2015, they would cut achievement gaps in half, and both access and success, for underrepresented minority and low-income students. That they would strive to reflect the racial and economic diversity of their states, that they would count students who are not always counted. This Access to Success has a fairly heavy data component that goes beyond IPEDS to include part-time students and other students who we know make a big part of success on our campuses, but we also always don't look at, so it's very much data-driven, and that we report our progress every year publicly. And through this initiative, EDI, the whole delivery approach was offered as one strand of the work, but there were others, including development of leading indicators to predict student success, work on financial aid, and a number of other work. So we spend a significant, well, let me back up one. So we worked with Michael Barber in interpreting the delivery methodology for the American context in its early days, and now are working directly in providing network support 3 times a year to our systems. We facilitate discussions in a broad learning community that uses a number of different media, and then on the ground we provide direct support to a number of our systems, including Kentucky. And these are the types of goals that we are working with systems to support. And as you can see, there are different approaches for different systems, but they're all about student success, about improving college completion, and about closing equity gaps. So basically, our underlying premise is pretty straightforward. We believe that if you have a goal, you must have a plan to deliver. Just goals without a concerted effort to move the organization to reach them are not going to get you where you need to go. Your Stronger by Degrees plan exemplifies what we would call a strong delivery. It has a clear focus, it's data-driven, it's very clear about the accountability, and it's really focused on action. So it's not, many strategic plans that we see at the beginning of the process are they're pretty, they have glossy covers, lots of nice pictures, they have lofty goals that could look the same from one campus to another, that were largely reached by a collaboration that consensus-driven, that required everybody on your campus to find themselves somewhere in those goals. But they don't have action and implementation plans that go along with them to ensure that they will move the agenda forward. So we really think about delivery as something that can support a number of different initiatives. This is not a new initiative. It's really an approach to support the initiative. So here you have a number of the different initiatives that we know about in Kentucky, as well as your campus goals, which are probably the most important in this particular setting. I'm sure there are others that you could think of that really are all working in more or less the same arena. They may have overlapping aspirations and targets, and we see them as interlocking. And in all of these cases, we would bring those same set of questions. So what is it you're trying to do? How could you be really, really clear about exactly what it is that you see as your ultimate goal? And then how are you planning to do it? What are the strategies that you're going to put in place? Why are you choosing some strategies over others? Are you putting some of your efforts into strategies that maybe aren't going to help you reach the goal? They're just things you've been doing for a long time under that guise of student success that may not make as much sense in the current context. And this one's really important. At any given moment, how will you know whether you're on track? You can't wait 6 years to see if your first-year programs deliver students walking across the stage to get their diploma, because by the time that happens, you will have lost far too many students. You need to put systems in place. You need to be able to look at data. You need to have routines that will help you identify those students early, identify those interventions that you've been investing in that maybe aren't returning on that investment, so you can move your limited resources behind the things that will really make a difference. And then, so that question of if you're not on track, what are you going to do about it, becomes very important along the way in order to continue the kind of progress that you're looking for if you're going to deliver on your goals. As John said, here in Kentucky, you're one of the first in our network. Well, where did it go? Oh dear. You are one of the, while I get this back here. You're one of the first systems, along with the PASHE system in Pennsylvania, to take delivery to the next level and form a network of campuses that are working on delivery. And we had our first network meeting in January. I know the network teams are busy at work and have been meeting on calls on a monthly basis since then. And we have another meeting, I think, coming up in June. So we're looking forward to continuing to work at the campus level and to learning more about what delivery looks like from the campus perspective from all of you, those of you that are involved. So these are the basic components to a delivery plan. The first one is the prioritized reform strategy. Do you have the right set of activities for each one of your goals? Basically, are you doing the right things? This is really important because you can invest a lot of resources into things that are not in the end going to move the needle. And as we all know, resources are far too precious on our campuses today to use them in ways that are not going to actually move the student success agenda forward. Data is really, really important because it will tell you where you're having an impact. So what can we expect? What can we expect from the strategies that we have in place? And how will we know whether or not they're working? And then delivery chains. Delivery chains help us identify who needs to be involved, who are the key players, and where could things go wrong? How can we anticipate where there are risks that we might be able to mitigate if we think ahead of time about whether or not they need to be addressed? I'm going to give you a few examples of some tools that we've developed or that our campuses have developed working with us using the delivery methodology. The first one is a delivery chain from the University of Hawaii system. This looks very messy and complicated, but that's what our organizations are really like. They identified, they have a strategy called 15 to Finish, where they're trying to get all of their students to take 15 credits every semester so that they can finish in 4 years. And what they did here was to map out, starting with the president of the system, saying she's established this goal, all the way down to impacting the student in the classroom. Who are all the people along the way, all the different groups along the way that need to be involved for that impact to really make a difference? And by mapping this out and thinking through who needed to be involved. They were able to identify the key players and actually to bring some people into the conversation early that might have been forgotten and could have derailed the process if they weren't part of the conversation at the right moment. Here's another tool. This is a dashboard that one of the campuses in the Missouri system used to focus the attention of their deans on various initiatives related to student success. And down the left-hand side of the chart, you'll see a number of different initiatives: first-year experience, advising process improvement, tutoring, and other things that they'd identified that they had put in place. Now, this is a pretty easy thing to do. It doesn't require a lot of data. It does require knowing what's going on. So what you've got here is each column represents a different college. And the members of the delivery team took it upon themselves to go out and interview people in each college and really get a sense of whether or not they were involved in these different things. And what you can see here by using what we call our traffic light system, red, green, and yellow, although because of our British roots we call it amber. And then we have amber green and amber red because you never want to give people a 3-point scale. They'll always choose the middle one. So we force them to go one direction or the other. Well, you can see here, College of Nursing is in really good shape, all green. And then you look at the College of Education, where you might hope for a different kind of result, but that's not what they found when they started looking here. And you've got red and amber red. So the delivery team leader started presenting this at every dean's meeting. And the first time, she said, the deans laughed at her. They were like, you got to be kidding. What is this really about? Well, then she brought it back the next time. And the provost was now paying attention too. And it started a conversation among the deans and between the deans and the delivery team of, well, what do I need to do to turn these colors to green? I mean, she said that somebody would call her, that she had deans call her and say, well, if I do this, would you give me a green for that? And it sounds silly, but it got people to start paying attention at the dean level, which can be very important in moving a college and a college faculty forward, started getting them paying attention to what role they were playing in orientation and whether or not they had graduation plans and 4-year degree plans in place, and really started to move the agenda. And this chart looks different today than it did the first time that she presented it. Here's another one. This is a trajectory, a sample campus trajectory. And again, what they were looking at their 6-year graduation rate goals. And we all know that the easiest thing when you've got a goal, you want to start here and you want to get to here, well, you just draw a straight line. Probably the line isn't very straight. Probably it's not as straight as this one. But what they did was they started by brainstorming all the different things they were doing that would help them meet this goal. And they ended up with a really long list, far too long to really keep track of. So then they grouped them together. So they ended up with these 8 categories: student experience, academic support, classroom level impact. And so they put them in these buckets. And then they looked out over the years in their plan and tried to think about, okay, so when do we think what kind of impact would this have? So let's just look at that first line, academic support. They were making some changes in academic support, and they didn't think it would happen until in the first year. But they thought overall, probably they were doing most of what they could do, so they would probably see a low impact of support there. Changes in